Talking now to the Justice Minister, Michael Masutha, joining us from Pretoria. Minister, good evening to you and welcome. Previously, you have overturned his granted parole application. Are you on board with this decision tonight?
Look, we still have to study the decision and get to grips with the reasons of the judge in this case. But my gut feeling at this point in time is that we're likely to appeal this decision because it flies in the face of our new policy thrust, which is to restore the place of the victim right at the center of the criminal justice system. And as a result, since our first case, the Eugene de Kock matter, if you recall, in 2014, we have since adopted a stance that says all reasonable effort should be made to ensure that the victim's opinion is taken into consideration when parole applications are considered. And we have since not approved a single parole application where there is no evidence of some effort to engage victims, and we've been consistent about that.
And if that indeed
is reversing us,
if that is indeed the pivot point, Minister, then on the evidence is clear. We spoke to Chris Hani a short while after the announcement, who said justice was not done here, also calling this a sad day for South Africa.
Yes, I could understand where she comes from, and I empathize with that sentiment because indeed we've been making a lot of progress since we adopted this stance because part of what corrections is about is for people to acknowledge that what they did was wrong and make some effort to reach out to the victim, to also assist the victim to go through healing. It cannot be a one-sided affair. Lady Justice scale has two arms and not one. So we really would want to look closely as to what it is that motivated this decision, because our view is that our entire system of victim-offender dialogue, which we are building up and strengthening, is precisely to try and bring some kind of reconciliation, which is a critical aspect even for rehabilitation of offenders. Unless an offender is prepared to accept responsibility, that in itself shows that our efforts to correct offending behavior has not succeeded.
Do you believe that Mr. Waluś has not done that, Minister?
Well, if he had, I am sure we would be elsewhere in relation to the reaction that you've just alluded to by the wife of the victim in this instance, Mrs. Hani. So the impression that we got when we perused his profile and the reports was that we hadn't gone past that stage yet. And we felt for that reason that he was not ready to be considered. Mindful, there's something that we need to remind everybody, that when you have completed your sentence, the state has no business with you. But parole is not an automatic right. If you're sentenced to life, you are indeed sentenced to life. Parole simply means continuing to serve your sentence outside of a correctional facility, subject to certain conditions. And to enjoy that privilege, you've got to earn it.
Minister, you say that you are going to appeal. Is it conceivable that he does not walk out of jail in 2 weeks' time? And what is the process you now enact?
Like I said, until I've studied the judgment, first of all, I need to be convinced as to the grounds in the first place why the judge overturned us. And that would inform our decision not only to appeal, but the grounds on which we would, if we so decide to appeal. My understanding of the system is that once we have noted an appeal or leave to appeal, then the order gets suspended until the appeal proceedings have been concluded. If the court rejects our application for leave, we still have the option to appeal that decision to the higher court. But of course, if they grant us leave to appeal would then proceed to the next level, which is the SCA. All I want to emphasize is that we have embarked on a new path in the criminal justice system, and that is to restore the victim of crime to their rightful place, and that is right at the center of the criminal justice system. And on the face of it, this looks like flying in the face of that.
And must he be incarcerated as these various judicial processes unfold?
Well, the effect of the order not being, being suspended whilst the appeal proceedings are finalized, it's my understanding, would be to suspend its effect as well, and that is to is for the parole order to be set aside for the time being.
There's been a widespread reaction. The ANC is asking for his deportation, and perhaps to ask a question in that regard would be to leapfrog too far. But let's maybe stay with what the PAC is saying, and they're saying it's an insult to people like applicator Kenny Motsamai, still in jail after 26 years. How does one balance the scales in cases like these?
Mr. Kenny Motsamai is the beneficiary of a decision to place him on parole, which decision took effect on the 18th of January, subject to conditions which are initially tighter for the first 6 months, and if there is full compliance over time, they get to be eased, which is the standard practice, especially if you are dealing with a case of violent crime. He has opted to reject the conditions, and we succeeded in court in a challenge that he brought against us for imposing the conditions. And if my memory serves me well, he is contemplating appealing that decision, which is his right. But let me just emphasize the point that parole is different from the amnesty system or presidential pardon, where political considerations and other considerations are made. Parole is a process where once a person has served for a certain minimum period, is entitled to be considered based on their performance and response to rehabilitation programs and other factors, which is the criteria that's used, and that's what happened in this instance.
Minister, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much. Justice Minister Michael Masutha responding to the ruling on Waluś.